Hello, welcome to my program talk show with interesting people. And guess who is my guest today? It's my very good friend Petem Gamem from England, from Eastbourne. So I'm glad, Pete, you are here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's really good to be with you, and very interesting that we can meet via social media and we can see each other and talk with each other. It's really good to be with you, and thank you for inviting me onto your show today.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm glad that you received my invitation. I have a few questions for you, and I think and I believe really that there are more people interested in the answers, not only me. Well, to be honest, I know some of the answers because I have known you for a certain time, let's say 16 years, 17 years or something like that.
16 years.
Could be. Okay, so my first question is, can you introduce yourself a bit? Family, wife, church?
Okay, right. Well, I was born a long time ago. As you can see, I'm not as young as Peter, who's interviewing me. I was born in 1945 in London by my parents, and I had two older brothers. And we lived in London, obviously in my early years. And I went to school there. Also, my parents, they were both Christians, so they would take me to church with them. And I'd go on Sunday afternoon. We used to have Sunday school, so I'd be going to that. So I grew up in a Christian family, and just like any other boy, I had my good times, my bad times. I didn't do too well at school, but I used to do enough to get by, not like my older brothers who worked harder and did much better than me. But that was my early life, and so that's where I grew up in London. And it was a good, happy childhood. My father was a tailor. Dad had polio when he was 3 years old, so his legs were crippled. He had to wear special boots and walk with a stick. But, you know, he used to ride a bike, and I used to love going to meet him at the bottom of the road, and he'd put me on the bike with him and cycle home. So I had a really good childhood, and we used to have lots of fun, and it was a good time for us. So that's my beginning of my life.
Okay, thank you. And I know that you were quite a young boy when you came to Jesus, isn't right?
That's right, yes. When I was 9 years old, at that time we had, in London, we had a lot of meetings with Billy Graham had come to London. He had originally come for 3 weeks for special meetings, but he stayed for, I think, about 2 months. Just so many people were coming, they just kept having more and more meetings. And one Saturday, a group of us from our church and Sunday school went to one of these meetings. I was 9 years old at that time, and so I heard the gospel being preached. At the end, when Billy Graham gave an appeal for anyone that would like to commit their life to Jesus, I asked my mum's permission, and off I walked away from down through the crowds, down to the front, where I went and stood with other people and made a commitment to Jesus as a 9-year-old boy. And it's amazing because when I stood there and looked around at all these people, thousands of people in this big open air stadium, I just somehow knew that one day I would be a preacher. So that was my beginning of my Christian walk. I had ups and downs, times when I found it really hard to read and pray and struggled and wondered if it was really worth going on with. But bit by bit, I started to grow in my faith. And then when I was 15, I got baptized in water again, which was another step forward. And I then got involved in our Sunday school. I used to help teach in the Sunday school. And when I was 16 in our church, we used to go out Sunday evenings onto the main streets and do some preaching. So I learned to go with the other people, and eventually I got to give my testimony and to start preaching on the streets when I was 16 years of age.
Well, so you started preaching when you were 16?
Yeah.
Wow. I was doing just completely different things when I was 16, to be honest. Okay, so tell me more about your ministry. So you started preaching when you were 16, but I know that you became a pastor or a leader of a church. You moved out of London. So what was the situation?
Okay. Yeah, when I was 16, there were a couple of things happened. One of them was I prayed a very specific prayer that God would lead me to the right young lady who would be my wife. And just a few days before I was 17, I'd gone on holiday with a group of other Christian young people. We got away on a holiday together, and Diane, who I'm now married to, was the only person in that group that I didn't know. And we got to know each other, and then we started to go out together when I was just 17, and when I was 21, we got married. But at first I was working when I left school, I just worked in an office. And then when I was 19, I actually gave up my job in the office, and I went and did a 3-month Bible school, 1-term Bible school. There's this man had this vision to do a 1-term residential Bible school, and I went there and did 3 months of that Bible school, which was very good. They didn't teach me anything about the Holy Spirit, but they gave us a good overview of what the Bible was all about. So I understood the Bible, how to read it, how to use it, and that was really good. And then when I came back from that, I had this desire even then to be able to work full-time in ministry, but I knew that that wasn't the right time, and so I got another job until we got married. And then after we got married, a company approached me to go and work for them. Instead of being in an office, I would now be out as a representative for the company, calling on their customers. And what they did, they asked me if we would move out of London, and we moved down to the south of England. And then within a short time, we moved from where we were in one place to where we lived in Eastbourne. And we've now been in Eastbourne for over 50 years.
Okay, and you started church there?
We were involved in it's again. That's another short prayer I prayed. We visited Eastbourne a few years before we got married, and we were asked to go visit a church. And this church was a very small church. It was really. This sounds terrible now because I'm of that age, but at that time I was about 19 or 20, and this church was full of people that were like 60 and 70 and 80 years of age. Now I'm in my 70s, so it seems strange, but then everybody looked like old people. And I remember praying and saying, Lord, that church is about to die. Why don't you send some young people like us there to help it? And I never realized that eventually that we would become part of that answer to prayer. And when God moved us out of London and we landed up in Eastbourne, we were living just about 400 meters from where that church was. And when we went there on the first Sunday, there were 3 other young couples that had moved into the area and started going to the church. And within 6 months of being there, they asked me if I would take on running the children's work, because they had even though they only had about 25 people in the church, we had a children and young people's work that had about 50 or 60 children and young people there. So they asked me to take on leading that work and also to become one of the elders in the church, because they said, we're all old people, we're about to die, and you better learn how to run the church. So that was how I got involved in church leadership, because the old people were trying to replace themselves with us younger people.
Yeah, but I know that you moved away, or you started you planted some other church after that.
Yeah, we got involved through a series of events some years later. We got involved with another group of people that were very strong, charismatic Pentecostal people, which was a real eye-opener. We'd been baptized in the Holy Spirit, but we hadn't had much experience. And it was with this church of mainly young people. They was all like teenagers and early 20s, and there were just a few of us in our 30s and 40s, like the lead that became leaders of this group. And out of that's when God really spoke to me about coming out of business and going into ministry full time. And so on the 31st of March 1985, I resigned from my job, and I didn't quite know what would happen. I just knew I had to seek God and to see what his way ahead was for me. I knew he had something for me. I had a plan, and that was originally to go visit some missionaries in South America. But then 2 weeks after I've given up my job, they wrote to me and said, oh, we've had to return to America. We won't be going back to South America, so we don't know when you can come. So that plan was cancelled. And then for 3 months, it seemed like nothing was happening. It seemed like, you know, people were saying, have you really heard God? People give me all sorts of suggestions. But there was a small group in another town, and I got sent there by the church within just to go minister to them. And eventually they came and asked that Diane and myself would be released from our church in Eastbourne so we could go there and help them. It's a town about 25 kilometers away, so we could just drive there and back in half an hour, no problem. And so we went to this group of 7 people meeting in a home, and that's where we started to plant a church in that town.
Wow. Well, you mentioned you quit your civil job, your business you were doing. It's interesting because we all known you as a preacher and as a fire preacher, but it's interesting that when you were in your 30s or maybe even younger, you were in business. So
yeah.
What kind of business was it?
Well, I worked for. Well, I had to go at business on my own once, but that was hard work and very difficult. And then I managed to sell that to a company, and I started to travel again as a salesman to call on companies. And I worked for an import firm. We used to import toys and stationery from places like China, Pakistan, all around the world. And I would go out and sell them to the distributors around in the country, who in turn would sell them to the shops. So I used to travel something like, doing that for about 10 years, I was traveling something like 60 to 70,000 kilometers every year. So I used to just live in my car. But when I was living in my car, I used to make that time to listen to Christian worship songs. That's before CDs and all the modern technology. Just had to listen, put cassette in the machine, listen to Christian music, Christian teaching. And the other thing I had was I had the New Testament, and I would listen to the New Testament as I was driving along. So God used those years of traveling to help prepare me for when I was going to give all my time to ministry.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And so how old you were exactly when you quit your job and went to full-time ministry? I
was nearly 40 years old, but 3 months.
Wow, okay. And
what is interesting was that when I was about 19, my brother Phil, he was going off to Bible college because God called him to be a missionary in what is now Bangladesh. And Diane said to me, we weren't married. I think we were engaged to be married. And she said to me, do you think you will ever be a missionary? And without thinking, I just said, no, I don't think I'll be a missionary. I said, but when I'm about 40 years of age, I think I'll give up my job and I'll start to travel around in this country preaching and teaching. I didn't realize I would also land up going to many other nations as well.
Wow. So it was a prophetic word you had over yourself.
Yes, and I didn't understand prophecy then.
Okay. How did you live on after you quit your job? So you had some financial support, you had some rich people, they supported you around, or?
When I left my job, I had some money in the bank and all that disappeared. My company used to give me a nice big Volvo car to drive in, that went back. And Diane had a little old Nissan car that would only travel about 20 kilometers or 10 or 20 kilometers before the engine would overheat. So we had no car, and the money in the bank was disappearing. Diane had a little part-time job that would give her enough money to buy the food for the family. And so we had to believe God for everything. And, you know, it was some hard times, but we saw some amazing miracles of supernatural provision.
So God was faithful, right?
Yeah. And then when we got involved with this little group in Uckfield, they sat down in this, where we went to help plant this church, they sat down and they made a commitment to give us so much money each week. But that wasn't enough to pay the mortgage on the house, but it was a start. At least we had something to believe God, to stand on as we believe God to meet our needs.
Yeah, I heard a story from you once when you were struggling financially. So you just looked up in your Bible all the promises about God's provisions, and you took all your bills and you were just putting it on these verses in the Bible, and you prayed over that. Is that true?
Yeah, that's good. I used to do two things. I used to put them all together and pray over them. Then sometimes I used to get a piece of paper and draw like a big mountain. And I used to level off the different levels, and I put the biggest bit at the bottom and then the next one and that one. And I used to speak to the mountain like Jesus said in Mark chapter 11, speak to the mountain. I used to speak to them and command provision to come. And we've seen God do so many amazing things in ways we never thought possible. It's just amazing what God has done.
Yeah, well, you know, the people, they know you and they know more stories like me or, you know, or less, because I know a lot of your stories. And so it seems like you've lived, you know, through your faith or by faith for so long time, and God was faithful and generous. But I know about you that you also were, you are, and you have been a generous person. So when God told you give someone, you gave someone. And so this is important. It's not only about receiving and giving, right?
Giving comes before receiving.
Yeah, that's it. That's right. I like the story about the suit you bought for this African preacher. So I like the story. You bought...
Oh, no, it wasn't an African preacher. It was for a man in our church who was very hard up, and he had a good job, but he needed good clothes. And God told me to buy him the suit. But then out of that, when I was in Africa, people went out and bought me clothes. And the same happened in India and in other nations too.
Okay, and how many suits did you receive?
So far, I think I've received 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I must have been given about 7 suits over the years.
Yeah.
Because you were with me once in London when a man took me out to buy me a suit.
I was there. He didn't buy me anything. It was just suit for you. Okay. I remember that. It was nice. It was nice. Okay, yeah, it was this, he was a lawyer or something like that. Yeah, it's good. Wow, God is faithful. Okay. So I think that for the first time, like a first interview, it's good. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ministry in our country and in other countries. So I think that the people, they know you, but they would like to know more, or they would like to know how you started and what you were doing before you came to their country. So it can be interesting. So God bless you. And I hope I'll see you next time with the other talk show, and it will be about your ministry with the connections and with Philip Mohabir. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and God bless you all.